One topic that has been on everyone's mind recently is the economy. Just 2 years ago, it was at one of its highest points ever, but today, things aren't looking nearly as good. Inflation is at its highest point in 40 years, and various links in our global supply chain have been breaking down. These and other circumstances are causing many people to wonder, is an economic collapse imminent? According to Investopedia, an economic collapse is a breakdown of a national, regional, or territorial economy that typically follows a time of crisis. And while economies are constantly expanding and contracting, a collapse is not part of that normal cycle. They can last several years and usually involve hyperinflation and widespread unemployment. And while an economic collapse is kind of the big bad that a lot of preppers are trying to get ready for, it's important to remember that there are different situations that can happen between when times are good and when they just completely fall apart. For example, we could have another recession, like how we did from 2008 to 2013, where the economy just generally slows down. That's when I graduated college, and it was pretty difficult to find a job during that time. Then there's also the possibility that the supply chain issues that we've been dealing with recently could get worse. Here in the United States, at least, we've been pretty fortunate that the things that have been in short supply haven't necessarily been, for the most part, life and death type things. Here in the US, most people aren't going to be starving to death because we can't get microchips for Ford F-150s. But we could end up in a situation because of everything going around the world now where there could be food shortages. So you want to be prepared for things like that. Then, of course, you cannot overlook the possibility of a personal financial disaster. That includes things like unemployment. You need to think about, what are you going to do if you lose your job? And that could just happen just as, a circumstance that happens to you specifically, or it could be the result of something that affects the economy at large. Maybe the sector that you work in is hit hard and you and a lot of other people lose your job. And then it could be other things, like maybe your house catches on fire or you suffer some other kind of large-scale loss of property. Those are the types of things that you want to be prepared for, in addition to the very widespread big picture thing of an economic collapse. And y'all, before we get too deep into this, I just want to do a quick disclaimer. I am not your financial advisor, nor do I want to be that. So make sure that any financial decisions that you make are well thought out, well researched, and not based off of what some random guy on YouTube says. When getting ready for different types of financial disasters, whether or not it's something large scale like a big economic collapse or something smaller scale like you're unemployed for a couple months, there are some things that you should be doing that are just good practices that'll help you prepare for a wide range of different types of situations. And one of those is reducing the amount of high interest debt that you have, and the biggest culprit of that is going to be credit cards. Some of those, they have interest rates anywhere from the teens all the way, almost to 30%, maybe more. I don't know. I think the highest one I've seen is like, in the upper 20s, but I'm sure that there are some higher ones out there. It can get absolutely crazy. It's the closest that your bank comes to being your loan shark. So you want to reduce that, because if you're in a situation where you're unemployed, then you don't want to be trying to pay for food and then also having hundreds of dollars of credit card interest, and then if you miss a payment, penalties and fees that you're racking up month after month. That's just something that's really good to get out from underneath. And you also want to try to have as many income streams coming in as possible. Doing that allows you to have a little bit extra money on the side to either put back in savings or to reduce debt. But another thing that it does is it makes you less vulnerable to a situation where you lose your job, either to downsizing or you just pop off to your boss, whatever the case may be. And who knows, it might grow into something that maybe you could do full time if your job is something that you're not necessarily happy with. And while this probably isn't something maybe that'll help with a full-scale economic collapse, because in a situation like that, because of hyperinflation, money would not be worth really anything. You also, you do want to have an emergency fund set aside, because it's not just the big stuff that can get us as preppers. The little stuff can get us too, and having a nest egg of several months of income, if possible, set aside, could insulate you from a lot of different situations. I know people that they went a while without a job really through no fault of their own, and if it wasn't for the money that they had in savings, then they probably would not have made it. And while it is a good idea to be preparing for an economic collapse, I think it's important to be well-rounded in the things that you're preparing for, and having some money set aside for a rainy day will allow you to be more flexible if another type of situation were to happen to you. One really good way to get ready for an economic collapse or some other type of financial emergency is to just have good stockpiles of your essentials of everyday living. And that includes things like food and water. You want to have good stockpiles of those to get you through at least a few months of something, preferably longer. I mean, really, it should be as much as you can afford. But you also want to have ways that you can renew your food storage as well. So a little while ago, I did a video over gardening. While a little garden on the side of your yard probably isn't going to be able to meet all of your food needs, it can be a good supplement. And then also, if you live in an area that allows hunting, be aware of the different seasons that go on throughout the year, because I know a lot of preppers, we already have the tools needed to hunt in a lot of cases, and it might just be a matter of starting to do that. So if you live in an area that allows that sort of thing, be sure you do that. I know most places in the U.S., you're good to go. I had somebody over in Europe comment that they can't hunt. That just blows my mind. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if it's like that everywhere because, well, I'm in Texas. But anyway, having a way to renew your food and your water storage as you go on is a great idea. And then some other supplies that you should have on hand are going to be medical supplies, things like medications, over-the-counter medications. If there's any way that you can talk your doctor into letting you have maybe an emergency supply of your prescriptions, that's more doable for some types of meds than others, and that just depends on your doctor. A while back, I did a video over Jace Medical. They offer prescriptions for emergency antibiotics. I think that's something good to look into. If there is an economic collapse or some sort of situation where maybe you're just unemployed, going to the doctor could be pretty challenging from a financial perspective, or if things are really bad, I mean, you might not maybe even be able to find one. Who knows? So having the ability to take care of minor illnesses and then also minor injuries, make sure you have a good first aid kit. You have antiseptics, things like isopropyl alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, really good for, like, if you think you're getting an ear infection, I put that in my ears. Not medical advice, do your own research, ask your doctor. But it also is an excellent cleaner. It'll kill some things that other types of like cleaning supplies will not, and it doesn't have a strong odor to it, so hydrogen peroxide is great. And then also povidone iodine for cleaning out wounds and stuff like that. So having your medical needs set up, or having the ability to take care of your medical needs, would be extremely important if for some reason you aren't able to pay for a doctor or you're just not able to go to one. Like I said earlier in the video, if an economic collapse were to happen, one thing that would definitely accompany it would be hyperinflation. I know a lot of us have seen photographs from things like the Great Depression or the situation in Venezuela, where people are going down the road with a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread because inflation has gotten to a point where money's really worth nothing. And if that were to happen, there are some things that you want to have set aside, or things that you want to be ready to do if that were to happen, to kind of overcome the fact that if you did have a nest egg, it's now worthless. And one of those is you want to have things that you can trade for other things that you need, because while as preppers we should have as much food, water, and other supplies set aside as humanly possible, if the situation lasts long enough, it's very likely that you're going to run out of at least something that you want or you need. So having things like precious metals is a good idea, and you want to have it in differing quantities. You don't want to have just a bunch of huge gold coins because, I mean, you need a way to break that stuff down. So gold and silver, of course, that's good to have. I'll be honest, that's one thing I haven't really branched out into yet. But if you don't have money to invest in stuff like that, then of course you could invest in other barter items. Things like salt, sugar, also other things like luxury goods. Those will be in demand. Things like little bits of soap. Coffee will be a big one, among other things. And then also another thing I mentioned earlier in the video was having a side hustle to have a little bit extra money coming in on the side. And it would be a really good idea to pick a side hustle that involves a skill that you could trade for things that you may need if there were a prolonged crisis. Because not everybody has the skills that they need to, say, maybe patch a hole in their roof, make minor repairs to their car or other things in their home. Maybe it's water filtration or purification. But the point is, if money is not worth anything, maybe you could, maybe your skills could become a currency that you could trade so that you could get other things that you need and build partnerships with other people in your community and kind of make, I guess, your own micro economy to make it through until the big one gets back on its feet. Another good way to be a little bit more prepared for different types of financial disasters is to be able to take care of repairs and maintenance on your own. Hiring somebody to repair things at on your home or on your car can get incredibly expensive. I know that me, for example, when I moved into the house that we're living in now, I had been a college student, then I'd been an apartment dweller, and I knew nothing about fixing stuff around the house. But I am a cheap individual, and I have learned a lot in the past several years. I mean, I've done everything from like plumbing to some light electrical work around the house. And the key to that really is just getting educated now, learning how to do it safely. And I mean, if you get good enough, and I mean, this does take time and it takes practice, it could be one of those skills that you can barter later on, in addition to just helping you save money for your own purposes. If there were to be some sort of economic collapse or other widespread financial disaster, one thing that you would need to be very concerned about is your security and your defense. In situations like that, crime is going to increase drastically. People are going to be desperate to feed their families. They're going to become angry. Things are going to become tense. And you need to be able to take care of yourself and your loved ones. And you need to make sure that you aren't doing things that would draw attention to you from those folks who have reached a point of desperation. So you want to exercise good OPSEC, operational security. And if everybody in your neighborhood is struggling, then you at least need to look like you are struggling too. Don't go around bragging about what you have. Don't be cooking, steaks on your charcoal grill when everybody else is starving to death. That's just a bad idea. So don't really let everybody else know what you have, either on purpose or accident. And then also, you want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to defend yourself and your loved ones. I'm not going to go into too great of detail here. I think that if you are looking for advice on that, I think John Lovell's Warrior Poet Society channel, he has a lot of good information. He's a very smart guy, former Army Ranger. But I know for me and my purposes, if I could only have one thing, it would be something that I could conceal and carry with me just because I'm not home all the time. And so while I do have those other things, that would be my concern, is I would want something that I could have with me pretty much at all times, because you never know where you're going to be when somebody decides that they want what you have. In addition to having the tools that you need to defend yourself and your loved ones, it's also a good idea to harden your home so that it's more difficult to get into, and also it's a less appealing target to begin with. That includes things like just security lighting, preferably solar powered motion lights that you can stick on the side of your house that will work whether or not your home has power or not, that can alert you if, somebody's in your yard, in your driveway. And really, the good thing about those isn't necessarily that it, sparks the deer in headlights reaction from the bad guy. It's that if you set it up right, it can alert you if somebody's there. You'll be able to see that light. Like I have one in my backyard that I have used that for, not necessarily to spook anybody, but if I'm in the living room and I see that light go on, I know that it picked up movement. And then also things like window security film that make it harder for somebody to get through your window, or door reinforcement kits. Not really necessarily things that make your house Fort Knox, that it can't be broken into, but it increases the amount of time that it will take a bad guy to get into your home, so that you will have the reaction time that you need to get yourself ready to defend yourself and your loved ones effectively. And another aspect of security and defense is knowing when to stay and knowing when to go. I know that there's a lot of people, especially if they have health problems or maybe they're a little bit older, and bugging out isn't really an option for them. I think at least having a plan of retreat, somewhere to go for at a minimum of at least a couple of days until things die down. Maybe if maybe there's just unrest in your specific neighborhood, I think that's a good idea, because there comes a time when no matter how well prepared you are, there could be a situation where you're overrun and you want to be able to retreat for the safety of yourself and your loved ones. Or you might be in a situation where, because of health or other reasons, you aren't able to fight back at all. And you definitely want to be able to get to safety, preferably before the threat reaches you, so that you put yourself in as little danger as possible. So now that we've covered things that you can do to prepare for economic collapses or other types of economic disaster situations, the question is, how likely is a collapse to happen? And you know me, I try not to be the fearmonger. I try to kind of be positive. So I'm hoping one doesn't happen. But I do see things realistically that do concern me, that one could happen eventually, at least within our lifetimes. And one of them is, things don't seem to be getting better. We've been dealing with situation after situation over the past couple years. And we keep asking ourselves, can it get any worse? And it seems like it does. I think we might be in one of those historical cycles where things just are bad for a while, and I hope it doesn't get to that point. But I mean, an economic collapse, the very definition of it is basically a situation that results from several different things, many different bad things happening all at once or close together. And I do kind of see that between the pandemic, and then that caused the supply chain issues, and then of course we have conflicts going on, and then with our political situation, especially here in the U.S., it's not good now. I mean, our government is not being a good steward of our economy at this point in time. So that definitely does concern me. And I think a recession within the next couple years, I think that's, I would not be surprised at all if that happened. And once again, guys, I'm not like a financial expert or not an advisor or anything like that. So don't do anything with your finances based off of what I say. But I do think with the way things are going, I think a recession could happen. And along with that comes the possibility that, I mean, unemployment in certain sectors could happen. So, and then, I mean, inflation, it could continue to get worse. Supply chain issues are likely to continue to get worse. Hopefully, some of the things that we've seen might be getting better, but really, who knows? I just think it's a really good idea to be as prepared as you can in as many ways as possible. Try to be well-rounded. Don't just prepare for one thing, because that one thing might not happen. I mean, you might be preparing for a total economic collapse and be sinking all of your money into food and supplies and then all this kind of stuff, and then you lose your job, which, yeah, you would have plenty to eat on, but you wouldn't be able to pay bills because you didn't have a nest egg. Whereas if you're just planning for something like a recession where there's unemployment and then the economy's just not doing as much and you have a lot of money in your nest egg, but you don't have any food or other supplies set aside, if everything does collapse, then all of that money that you set aside could be worthless. So it's kind of, if you go too far one way, you are exposing yourself to one set of problems, but if you go too far the other way, then you're exposing yourself to other sets of problems. So I think trying to be well-rounded and as balanced as possible is a very good idea at this point in time, just because we don't know what we're going to be dealing with in the near future or even years from now. And y'all, an economic collapse is a really big topic, and it's hard to cover in just one video. This was kind of, I guess, just a primer over it. So if there's comments, if there's topics maybe I didn't include in this, or you would like greater detail of the topics I did cover, go ahead and drop those in the comments below. Y'all have a good one. Thanks again.